Welcome, everyone. I hope you can hear me. We are starting this because we are delaying too much. Welcome to this keynote session of our conference on Anglicists and Americanists today. My name is Laura Carmen Pizitaru, and I have the great pleasure and honor of chairing the session. Our keynote speaker is Professor Christian Mair, a distinguished linguist and internationally respected scholar in the field of English linguistics, who earned his PhD and habilitation at the University of Innsbruck in Austria. His research has significantly shaped our understanding of modern English grammar, particularly through corpus-based approaches, and his work extends across to the study of standard and non-standard Englishes worldwide. He is author or co-author or editor of much appreciated books and textbooks, both in English and in German. I can mention here some earlier work on syntax in discourse in his 1990 volume, Infinitival Complement Clauses in English, or his 2006 influential monograph, 20th Century English, History, Variation, and Standardization, or his 2022 widely used English linguistics, which, may I say, is one of the main resources provided for the course in general linguistics taught to first-year students in English here at our university. Over 200 academic publications reflect Professor Mair's long-standing interest in enduring issues in the field of linguistics, like, for example, language change and the factors behind it. He is concerned with attitudes toward English use in Germany, since English is becoming a lingua franca there. He has been looking at how English is used in different parts of the world, like India or sub-Saharan Africa, but not only, and made a very interesting point in showing that perhaps too much attention is paid by linguists working on world Englishes to culture and identity, to the detriment of the relationship between languages and money in global economy. Currently, Professor Mair's focus lies on the role of global English in a multilingual world, multilingual practices in digital communication, and the sociolinguistics of diaspora and migration. In this context, he is a strong advocate for the development and use of more spoken, more multilingual, and more non-standard corpora to complement traditional approaches. Professor Mair also actively promotes the systematic integration of corpora and digital language resources into undergraduate teaching, not only in linguistics, but also in literature and cultural studies, emphasizing their value across disciplines in the humanities. All of this is based on a firm belief in usage-based linguistics, of which corpus linguistics is a crucial methodological element. May I conclude by saying that this could be the main direction of most, if not all, future linguistic research, because indeed a thorough account of language structures requires situating it within current linguistic and cognitive theories. This means taking into account human interplay, how we perceive, how we interpret, how we respond to social signals, how we think about experience, about memory, about learning. But this also means taking into account the dynamics of cultural transmission and evolution, habits and customs within speech communities, demographic factors like age, sex, social status, or mobility that have been shaping language change throughout human history must equally be included in such descriptions. In recognition of his outstanding scholarly contributions, Professor Mair was awarded the degree of Doctor Honoris Causa by Alexandru Ioan Cuza University in 2005. One last thing. Great relationships have been established and developed between the departments of English in the two universities, and Professor Mair has been a reliable promoter of academic and student exchange programs over the years. To many of us, members of the English department, current or retired, he is not only someone we look up to, but also a beloved friend. Today, he will be speaking to us on a topic that could not be more relevant in our hyper-connected world: language spread and language competition, speaking about power, in the 21st century, the digital factor. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Christian Mair.
Yeah, Laura, thank you very much for this gracious introduction. Of course, for the reasons that you have mentioned, Yash has always been a special place to me since my first visit in 1991. And I would much prefer to be in the audience, physically present, but an examination calendar has made it impossible this time. And so digital media will have to make do. Topic has been introduced, and before I get specific and focus on language in the English language in European countries, among them Romania, I will just give you a very basic introduction to the general background. If you think about the history of English in the world and languages in the world and multilingualism in the world, you will notice that we live in a historically unique period, in a kind of unipolar world language system in which one language at some level, for the first time in history, truly integrates the world. Not completely, of course, but to an important extent. Before that, roughly to around 1970, the world was characterized by a multipolar world language system with competing world languages. You look at the United Nations, founded in 1945 after the end of World War II, 8th of May being a prominent day in this connection. They realized that there would be no one language which could be used as a working lingua franca, and so the choices were English, French, Chinese, Russian, and Spanish, for obvious political reasons that we cannot go into here. If you look at the natural sciences, today a domain of English as a global lingua franca without any compromise, up to around 1940, nuclear physics, for example, was a condominium in terms of languages, where German, English, and French served as roughly equally powerful and effective languages of scholarly communication. If you look at the world from around 1970 or the 1970s, you realize that there is a growing trend, now probably irreversible and unstoppable, towards English as the global lingua franca for the time being. You look at the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, founded in 1960. They were looking for a neutral headquarters and settled on the capital of my native Austria, Vienna. And they were looking for an equally neutral lingua franca, and that was English. Civil aviation, terrible disasters have happened with English as the global lingua franca of air traffic. But I'm pretty sure that even more terrible disasters would have happened if we didn't have this lingua franca. And I guess if you dream of publishing scientific insights in nuclear physics in a language other than English today, then you will have no audience. Now, let's go back a mere century. How were ideas spread in those days? Darwin's significant evolutionary theory, conceived and first published in 1859, The Origin of Species. How would Romanians have learned about these new insights at the time? Many of them probably would have found it easier to refer to the French or German translation, published in 1862 and 1860 respectively, than to the English original. that is a nice illustration of what I mentioned as the condominium of French, English, and German as languages of scholarly publication. So natural sciences and social and societies and humanities were dependent on translation. You see here that in 1957, a Romanian translation of this foundational work was added to a huge body of translations of Darwin's oeuvre. If I had more time than I have in my talk today, I would, of course, say a few words about how translation always means interpretation. If you think about things like the struggle for life, favored races, the highly charged term race, and so on, it's all very difficult to translate. And if you go through a number of German translations of Darwin from the 19th to the 21st century, you will see that they all come up with different solutions. So this is our multilingual world, hierarchically structured to an extreme extent. You see that according to the Ethnologue Languages of the World database on the 21st of March, we were living in a world with more than 7,000 languages, most of which are either severely endangered, red, or somewhat endangered, and you find them concentrated in certain areas of the world. A very clever Dutch sociologist who is one of my inspirations, so note that important insights that give rise to progress in linguistics very often come from other disciplines, looked at the confusing picture of a global multilingualism involving 7,000 languages and argued that, in fact, you could all assemble them in a highly stratified system where the top tier, one, which he called hypercentral, contained exactly one language only, the global lingua franca. On the tier below, there were around 20 languages of the type that he called supercentral, important not only within their national territories, but serving and thus complementing English in some transnational uses and functions. And as you can see, you would find European ex-colonial languages among this group and a few non-European languages. On the tier below, there are the central languages where he would, by his criteria, classify Romanian. These are languages that are securely established in the national territory, where they have full prestige as national languages, where they have an educational system to support standardization and the preservation of language and the associated cultural heritage. And as you can see, we've accounted for about 250, even less or fewer languages. And the vast majority of the world's languages hence falls into his category of peripheral languages. And the question we have now in the digital revolution is this brutal and efficient system where some languages are so clearly privileged, whereas others hold on to precarious privilege in their national territories, whether this system can survive the onslaught of the digital revolution. Before I turn to digital language, another comment. Here I have the big five, and the blue is native speaker, and the yellow or orange part of the bar is L2 speakers. Now, if the ranking of importance was solely based on native speakers, English would not be where it is. So if you want, we, German L1 speakers, Romanian L1 speakers, or any other non-English speaking nationality present at our conference, contribute to the global status of English, because we are part of the overwhelming majority of non-L1, non-native speakers of English. Chinese is growing in importance, but it won't be a rival to English until the yellow portion of the bar is much, much higher. Hindi will not be a rival to English because most of its non-native speakers are still Indians living in India. Spanish has more native speakers than English, if you have a look at the diagram, but nevertheless, it will not become a rival, and it has never been a rival, because it has never established the same post-colonial ESL presence or global lingua franca presence. The one rival, which structurally is similar to English, is French, but of course the absolute numbers are so much less than English. And if you go back to the Darwin slide, I said Romanians would probably have ended up with the French translation because at the time French had the role of English. If you spoke one language in addition to your own, today it would be English in most parts of the world. In those days, in Europe definitely, it was still French. Now, what about digital inclusion and digital exclusion? Technology adding new opportunities to make small languages big, and more often than that, posing threats to the status of the less powerful languages today. Microsoft analysts who sometimes are thinking about the social consequences of all the inventions they are working on, a team around Joshi et al. In 2020 established a 6-level hierarchy, which is strangely reminiscent of the world language system. And on top, you find the winners, a handful of languages that have it all. They have language technological infrastructure. You can find automatic speech recognition that works for them. You find machine translation that works for them. Then you have what they call the underdogs, and what I would call the runners-up. That would be languages that have most of it, but are clearly on a level inferior to the top dogs. Then there are languages whose digital future is uncertain. And this should not come as a threat, but for speakers, L1 speakers of these languages, whether in Lithuania or Romania, the question is, how do we develop language policies for the digital age that help us to secure a future for our language alongside English? You will not replace English in the digital sphere with Romanian. There is no language policy which is plausible to bring that about. It would not even be desirable. And the criteria, as I will point out in what follows, are really simple. Does the language have corpus linguistic infrastructure? Are there enough digitized data preserving the linguistic heritage of Romanian? Are there enough linguistic corpora enabling the study of the history and the present diversity of Romanian in Romania, among Romanians in the global diaspora, among Romanians as minority speakers elsewhere? And that is what academics can work on. And then there is the world of the internet, which you cannot plan, but where you can give nudges. And what a language needs to survive in the digital sphere is formal codification in corpora and an informal and lively presence in social media. So every Romanian web user basically will determine the future status of Romanian, just like every German-speaking web user will determine the future status of German on the web by deciding whether they consult English Wikipedia or Romanian Wikipedia, whether they bother to make Romanian Wikipedia better, and so on. You get the drift. Then as you go down, the names say it all. Hopeful but uncertain, scraping bys. You are just at the lowest limit, and the left behind is unfortunately the hugest blob in this diagram. Bottom right, languages for which there is no hope of a digital future. Now, when it comes to digital presence of language, the situation, or languages, the situation is very, very difficult. Early on in the web, people tried to make assessments and estimates of internet language statistics by users L1. But of course, all of us know that the monolingual user, L1 user of the web, is a fiction. You may come close to this fiction in Japan, where 120 million people speaking Japanese have long had the technological level of development to have a web presence where they find all the content they want in Japanese offered to them, and where very few of them have an urgent need to go to the English language web. But for most of us, it is always a matter of choice. Which language do we use alongside English when we use the web? So then there is interlanguage statistics by content, which is the better measure, because content available in terms of quantity and quality clearly is a measure of attraction, productivity, population. These sites are where the action is on the internet. But of course, we shouldn't forget that there is a large number of multilingual websites, starting with the European Parliament, for example, that offer content in more than one language. And so multilingualism on the web is also present in this connection. And so in a way, as you can see, I will now offer you a few statistics. I hope I won't bore the parts of the audience that are not interested in statistics, but I will try to draw the most important lessons from the statistics. So this is basically the approach which I viewed most critically. You look at number of English and Chinese L1 speakers, percentage of them who are on the internet, and then you do your calculations. So this is all really very hocus pocus, and the only thing you can learn from it, from this, is the red figures in the column for user growth, because that gives a real message. In the old days, people were afraid that the web might become an English language monoculture, and they were very worried about that. But if you now look at these statistics, you see that English has scored a very limited growth. I mean, 742% is not a limited growth, but if you compare it to the 9,340% growth for Arabic, you can see that apart from Japanese and German that were present on the web before 2000 in significant amounts, every other language in the world has caught up to English, not gone past English. That would be unrealistic. And so the message that this table tells us is, forget about the details, but the web has become a more multilingual place than it was before 2000, the turn of the millennium, and people are making the web more multilingual in a rather limited way. Now let's look at the top 10 content-based ratings. You look at Statista, you look at WTS, the percentages contrast a little, but there is fundamental agreement that between 50 and 60% of the world's web content is English. And that, I think, is a drastic piece of evidence supporting the brutal, exclusive, but ultimately efficient world language system as described by this one. In Statista, the runner-up is Russian. In WTS, it's Spanish, but as you can see, it doesn't make it. It's a distinction without the difference, because there are minor differences in the order, and there are some exclusions, some inclusions, but in principle, it's pretty clear who the top 10 are. Now I will take a further step and look at Wikipedia. Why am I looking at Wikipedia in this connection? First of all, because from a social sciences point of view, Wikipedia is a socially constructive, cooperative effort on the part of web users to make a better world by spreading reliable information everywhere. And this is a good thing, and this is culturally relevant. Second reason is that whenever large language models are developed that we need for automatic translation, machine translation, that we need for speech synthesis, chatbots like ChatGPT and so on, some of the training data are definitely taken from Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is easily available. It is a good mix of languages, and Wikipedia is more multilingual, has more perspectives, and is culturally more diversified than other parts of the web, like an Amazon shopping web page. Now you look at this and you see that there are two lines highlighted in red. You probably won't know necessarily, I don't want to underestimate the intelligence of my audience, but Cebuano and Waray, for those you don't know, are Austronesian languages spoken in the Philippines. And the reason why they turn up in this list are that there are apparently bots at work who automatically machine translate Wikipedia content into these languages. But of course, the quality is highly questionable. And so this is not real progress. Over the years between 2006 and 2023, this is really a kind of technical experiment. As you can see, Dutch is in, Swedish is in. Do I see Polish? No. This is really an area where cultural language political activism might have immediate benefits, not only in boosting web presence itself, but also in providing data for making machine translation better, from Romanian into Polish, for example. Because where would these algorithms learn if they can't rely on existing workable, relatively good quality translations in the training data? So this is where I see Romanian. It is a rising star. It has the potential. And unsupervised pre-training is an energy boost for these languages. With a strong web presence, there is a thriving cultural community online for them. Make sure that most Romanians are able to speak English well enough to consult the web in English when necessary, but then preserve a thriving cultural community online, as reflected, for example, in Wikipedia, because this will cause a self-reinforcing loop in which all applications of a language technological nature will become better. Now, of course, I have had the honor of being given the honor of talking to you, not because of ranting on digital multilingualism only, but to also talk about the future of English. And this is what I'm going to do from now. What has the digital revolution done to English, the pluricentric world language? My answer is basically in two paradoxes. First paradox is the standardization paradox. English has become more homogeneous and more heterogeneous at the same time. And one result is that technology is now replacing cultural elites as norm-defining agents in linguistic standardization. So that's the homogeneity. And the heterogeneity is that in spite of all the technologically driven standardization, selected non-standard varieties are doing extremely well online. And we will look into the reasons why. Experiment one, all of us teach our students the contrast between British and American English. And we assume that these are codified, these are permanent, and that these are stable. However, I fear that the second most powerful standard variety of English, British English, may not survive large language models, machine translation, and all the language technology that will increasingly become a part of our lives. A little experiment that I carried out when I was quarantined for a COVID episode, and I was well enough to play around with ChatGPT, then still fairly new. I said, okay, let's trick ChatGPT, which is after all a chatbot and not a linguistically aware and stylistically sensitive human being. And I said, could you please proofread the following text and correct all the spelling and grammar errors? And my trick was that I sneaked in a few Briticisms. So modern language technology, in particular AI-based text generation, is a powerful new standardizing agent. Briticism 1, many people in Britain spell with Z. But one thing you can say, Americans wouldn't spell it like this. It will make it difficult to maintain all established standard varieties of English except American Standard English, thus producing a linguistic monoculture. What can we do to prevent this happening? Note a syntactic Briticism. Americans would want to have a from between prevent and this happening. Prevent this from happening. Some British speakers would also say prevent this from happening, but they in addition can use this. And that with help, Americans would be more likely to delete the two than British speakers. Help us maintain. What is corrected as an error? Everything which is British is eliminated as an error. And now you think about a world in which more and more British speakers, British pupils will use ChatGPT to fake their essays, in which more teachers will use ChatGPT to help them with preparation of teaching materials. And more local reporters in underfunded local newspapers will use these chatbots to write copy. This will not be British stuff according to the textbook. And I think having developed the habit of spelling British English, I would feel personally sorry to see British English go in my lifetime. Let's put it like this. Then, of course, I pressed the chatbot and said, did you really not find any errors at all? And the answer was the obsequious politeness that you usually get. Apologies for the oversight. Here are the correct errors. And then the corrected errors, and then the quote was put into inverted quotes. In a similar experiment that I had carried out a little earlier than that, I tested the metalinguistic awareness of the chatbot, and I got the tautological explanation that it usually enforced commonly accepted spelling conventions and usage patterns, and that was the norm. But of course, what is accepted is de facto North American usage, and not commonly or internationally accepted usage. Apologies for the misunderstanding when I further bothered it. When it comes to spelling variations, ChatGPT tends to lean towards using American English spelling norms. Understatement of the century, it doesn't tend to lean towards using American English. It strictly enforces American English, though apparently it is aware, inverted commas, of British English. If you have specific preferences or requirements regarding spelling norms, it's always a good idea to specify them so that I can tailor the responses accordingly. That's what I did. You always take good advice, don't you? Believe it or not, it actually managed to implement British spelling for exactly one line. And then we're back to honor and labor in the American spelling. Some people tell me that I should have got out a paid subscription for ChatGPT 4, but I don't think it would have made much difference. Okay, so the thing that kills off British English is now confronted with Nigerian Pidgin English, a marginalized, low prestige variety, even in its own home territory, Nigeria, but nevertheless also a variety with a very lively social media community. And now if you think about the fact that there are around 250 million Nigerians, and half of them write Pidgin alongside English on the web, you see that all of a sudden sheer demography will feed so much Nigerian Pidgin onto the web that inevitably it ends up in the training data. And now you all know when I ask, can I get ChatGPT to write in Nigerian English? What I mean is a kind of standard international English in which some Nigerian words and phrases are used. But of course, this is not what I get, because what I get is, of course, I fit try write for you for Nigerian English. What do you want make I write about? So, Pidgin. What are specific features of Nigerian English in comparison to other major non-standard varieties of English? Nigerian English, like other forms of English worldwide, so this is Nigerian English and international English, and then we slip back, does carry its own unique features will make them stand out from other varieties. Some of these features include English again. Vocabulary, Nigerian English, get plenty words and phrases we then done adopt from local languages like Pidgin English, Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa. And then English again. And it's mostly true, but not completely true. Where does this come from? It comes from the input. Because so much Nigerian social media English is saturated with Pidgin, this is what is easy to generate. And we can learn an offline lesson from this, because digital use has led to a loss of stigma in the language of Pidgin. And rather than being something which you are ashamed of, it all of a sudden turns into a creative resource for the creation of slang. It becomes an identity marker for Nigerians emigrating to the UK, to Canada, to the US, to Germany. And in a way, the digital revolution has changed the shape of English. And I will now show you an example how post-colonial internationalisms emerging in Lagos, the capital of Nigerian slang, then spreading into Nigerian online usage, end up in the OED within a matter of only 10 years. So you have, if you want, a colonial legacy, the Oxford English Dictionary. If you want a monument of philological, historical, etymological research, one of the biggest dictionary projects ever, which has been digitized itself, and which you could say has turned from a dictionary into a digital knowledge resource. So these incompatible partners come together in a fairly happy marriage. And my example is the word Japa, which comes from Yoruba, one of the major indigenous languages of Nigeria, is borrowed into Pidgin. In Yoruba, it means run, escape. In Pidgin, it means run, escape by migration, formal or informal, legal or illegal, into anywhere in the world that offers more opportunity than Nigeria itself. You look at a corpus and you will find realistic uses. So that is a Nigerian newspaper, and they talk about young people's desire or desperate desire to be able to find opportunities abroad. Nigerians want bad luck, penury, cashless conditions to die in their lives. Hence you see them in churches with warfare prayers to kill poverty in their lives. Bado is a local music performer, of course, will arouse emotion by using Pidgin and the word Japa. I dey hustle, make the poverty Japa. I will try hard, work hard to make poverty disappear. Then you get Yoruba, typical post-colonial multilingualism, and that's the word. Here, another newspaper pontificates the obvious. The word Japa connotes a strong desire to emigrate from the country without the future plan of returning. Now, there are already Nigerians who are, of course, into the vibe, based in London, or sometimes performing in Nigeria, sometimes performing in the UK, in the rest of Europe, perhaps even in the US. And they take up this slang and make it even more popular. And all of a sudden, because it's concert stuff and music concerts are reviewed, you might get a song Japa with a video that other people who are not Nigerian find cool being written about in the newspapers, English language or otherwise. And I have given you this, perhaps you will want to come back to the video, and then you can appreciate the semi-linguistics that is displayed by this hip hopper. He mimics the format of an OED entry, but of course, if you look at the details, the International Phonetic Alphabet is used in an entirely ornamental way and without any understanding. But this is the real dictionary, the OED online entry, which was added to the OED just soon enough for me to be able to talk to you about it on this occasion today. And I said post-colonial internationalism. And my next paper will be on post-colonial internationalisms, because I think that this is not the only one of its kind. They are all over the place, and this is a new way of consulting the OED for a useful purpose. They increasingly include words and innovations from varieties of English other than British English. And Japa is one example. And as you can see from the details, they give you the etymology. And then if you look at the sources, they are local Nigerian newspapers, they are posts on social media, and they are not, they originate from all over the world, which is really why these words, from basically the moment they are created, become international and global. So that is global English from below, global English as seen through the lens of popular culture and slang. And this is an illustration of how global English will become more heterogeneous and not only more homogeneous at the same time. The first paradox. Summary of this talk: global English and how to respond in order to preserve a kind of intelligent, fairer multilingualism in the 21st century than the one that we have got. Two of my authorities are famous scholars, probably the most famous grammarian in the English-speaking world, Randolph Quirk, Lord Bloomsbury, who back in 1988 realized that a terrible handicap of the monolingual native speaker might be that they don't bother enough to learn foreign languages. And even if 1/4 of the world's population speaks English, then 3/4 still live their lives in languages other than English, and they might be interesting to explore in diversity, but they cannot be explored through English. So meanwhile, foreigners go on stubbornly using foreign languages, and the losers are the Anglo-Saxons who stubbornly decline to learn them. This one, originator of the world language system, he points out the importance of the listener. So the speaker can decide to speak whichever language they want. But alas, what decides is not the right of human beings to speak whatever language they wish, but the freedom of everyone else to ignore what one says in the language of one's choice. So what is English today? I couldn't have put it better than Salomone in a recent book on the politics of global English. English is a language like any other language when you use it in face-to-face interaction, but as a global lingua franca, it is more like what in German would be called a Kulturtechnik, a cultural, economic skill, a survival skill that you need to function as a cosmopolitan citizen or a global citizen in an increasingly interconnected world. And as always, in a world of limited resources and limited access to resources, information, languages, money, or otherwise, cultural development, the ideal, what's in the way between us and the ideal world, access to English as a global lingua franca is still restricted for many people, even in Europe. Hidden native speakerism may destroy the level playing field among competent users of ELF. Why is it still a fact, frequently observed, that a fairly fluent English as a second language or foreign language speaker like myself, or my Lithuanian, Polish, or Romanian equivalent may have a feeling of inferiority the moment native speakers join an educated event? Do we evaluate them on what they can contribute in terms of substance, or do we evaluate them on how convincingly they make their points in a native accent? Humanities and qualitative social sciences evolve in language-specific traditions of speaking and writing. So can you talk about German literature in a meaningful way by explaining how the English translation works to English-speaking audiences? Is there a hidden Anglo-cultural bias even in a supposedly neutral lingua franca English? These are questions that give rise to debate and that we should focus on in future. I take it from the great keynote talk that preceded mine that we are supposed to sort of raise these issues. And in spite of our totally different subject, I have recognized a similarity of purposes in our two talks. I'm reflecting on whether we aren't pushing the wrong theories or too much theory to our students in a world in which the facts are changing so dramatically that we should just focus on something different. And if you go through this, that's a nice example of how English can make you silent, even if there are many, many noisy English as a lingua franca conferences like ours. One of the major global historians has put it like this: global history is another Anglospheric invention to integrate the other into a cosmopolitan narrative on our own terms in our tongue. Global history would not be possible without the globalization of the English language, but this kind of flatness can mask a new linguistic hierarchy. It is one of the paradoxes of global history that the drive to overcome Eurocentrism contributed to the Anglicizing of intellectual lives around the world. This resonates with me immediately, and like many of you, I haven't probably done enough to publish some of my findings in German alongside English. I would never go back to doing Deutsche Anglistik in deutscher Sprache, but perhaps we can reach audiences beyond the ones we reach when we publish in English studies. And I will just, then there are also the issues, plagiarism, agency. Who's responsible for hate speech when you want to sue somebody who makes you the victim of hate speech, and then you go through the individual posts and you see that half of them have been produced by bots? It's probably the agency that runs the bot, but you see all these issues of responsibility. What is yourself in the language and what is not take on an entirely different dimension. And I was sort of finally playfully experimenting. You know the way I look because you've seen me in my messed up office, and I did some polishing. You are still, this could be me if you have a better image of myself generated. I didn't go through accent leveling, so my intended British English could probably have been improved by some language technological polishing. I'm probably a little bit too stuffy, redundant, and formal. So, and those of you who don't bother or prefer to listen to my talk in Romanian, you could have got it automatically translated by Meta's Universal Translator. I'm not so sure about it. It's spookily well. It works spookily well when you translate from English to German. I don't know how well it would perform when translating from English to Romania, but still, that's the music of the future. But this is my final slide. These are the challenges ahead of us. First, I'm not a pessimist, but still, I want to take you down the dystopian road. And the dystopian road is laissez-faire and learning from e-commerce on the web. So what multilingualism do you get, or will we get if we go along this road? An even more highly selective and reduced one than we have now. It will only be the languages of the many and not the few that will have a chance. Even worse, it will only be the languages of the people who have money. It will increasingly lead to a world in which English only and not English plus becomes the motto. And in terms of culture, which is a concern also to linguists, believe it or not, at least on a personal level, we would be heading towards a culture of the clickbait and the box office, and a kind of downward spiral and absolute trivialization and uniformity and boredom. Now, the uphill road, the utopian road, is learning from Wikipedia, perhaps. Use digital technology for language maintenance. And there are some wonderful examples of how very small communities of speakers, like, for example, the Lakota community in the Native American community in the US, has used the internet to make sure that the intergenerational continuity is preserved by producing wonderful teaching materials and so on. Technologizing languages is a form of cultural activism. People who compile a corpus of historical Romanian, people who digitize the heritage, make sure that there is a future for the language in the age of language technology. Never try to replace English. That's an impossible task. It would be done quicksand. Make sure that language X can be used alongside English in some way. And I would say in this case, you have domesticated the technologies for cultural diversity, cultural contact in a level playing field, and cultural exchange. I think I'm running over my time, so I guess I'll stop here and end the presentation, and I look forward to your comments and questions.
Thank you, Professor. No, sorry, just a second. Thank you, Professor Mair, for most interesting and insightful speech. We have some time, I guess, for some questions. If anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Or if you'd like more time to think about it, I would have a question myself. I noticed, I think in the opening slides, Darwin's Origin of Species book.
Mm-hmm.
And right after the publication, many linguists in Europe likened languages to living organisms because they emerge, they develop, they compete with each other, they die out.
They eat each other up.
Yeah. Of course, with the criticism that languages are not independent from their speakers, not independent organisms, and so on. But in the light of seeing English spread like threatening to become the only universal language, do you think we might be witnessing the outcome of the survival, or at least, the fittest language there is?
Great question. Many thanks. The organic biological metaphor is an extremely seductive one. Like all metaphors, it is a switch, an off switch for the mind. Once it's conventionalized, it stops you from thinking about the details. So you have the big picture, a language replacing another language all of a sudden becomes a killer language because a fitter organism winning out. And the languages that are replaced by English will be dinosaurs, extinct, not fit for evolution. And so I would say this powerful metaphor had its day. Darwinism was important as a metaphor. There is social Darwinism in the social sciences with terrible consequences. And that shows you the danger of metaphors. And I would say I haven't got much time today for metaphors of the Darwinian kind when it comes to language competition. Because let's think about why do we call killer languages? Why do we call English a killer language? If you think about it, British colonialism led to genocide against indigenous people in Australia, in North America. And their languages disappeared, but it wasn't about killing the languages. There was genocide as a consequence of colonialism. And what people did was that they shifted to English, and they shifted to English under complex pressures. And in a colonial environment, you always find this ambiguity. People are rarely forced to give up their languages. There are, of course, brutal cases where it is forbidden to speak language X. We all know about this in many countries, which I'm not going to mention even today. But the more likely thing is people are multilingual. They speak English because you can't live in a colonial environment, get anywhere without any idea of the colonial. It's upward social mobility. And that you mentioned that money and identity come together. Now, people who have to navigate this complex in a colonial environment, upward mobility, money, status, position, job, means you learn English. You make sure your children learn English. Identity, cultural belonging, that means you retain your own language. And so it's all very complex, much more complex. And my favorite metaphor when we talk about language spread is the invisible hand. It's another metaphor. In economic theory, Adam Smith, how do we know that the economic market is free in the way described by the self-regulation that Adam Smith has in mind with his invisible hand, but we also know that the free market is not a fair market. And I see for the 21st century, I would say, let's take this metaphor. It may explain some of the things that are happening. The global stampede towards English is clearly a kind of market effect in many different places and in many different constellations and for many different reasons in the world. People are converging on English, on English, just like they are. Stupid example. Certain brands are popular around the world. And the reason why brand X is famous in Romania may be totally different from the reason why US produced brand X may be famous in South Africa. It's entirely different. The social significance in the local, going to McDonald's to have lunch is a totally different social act in Germany, in Sweden, and in Japan, and in Kinshasa, in Congo. It's so I would say there are, to some extent, the self-regulating invisible hand process is probably a mechanism which captures some of, like, the total reversal between French and English. So in 1850, you learned one foreign language in Europe, it was French. If you have time to learn another, you would think about whether to learn German or English. Today, it's exactly the other way around. This was not engineered. This was not decreed. And even the European Union language policies, they are never implemented. The three language formula and so on. There are too many free linguistic market things happening. And so I would say this metaphor also has its risks. But I think the Darwin language as organism metaphor today, if we revived it, it would be doing more harm than good.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, thank you. Let me check if anyone has any other question. We still have maybe 1 minute. I got, a question on little piece of paper from one of my former students, and he was asking about this possibility of English becoming a universal language, which has been a long-standing dream of mankind, perhaps after Babel, anyway, thinking that it could lead to ending all misunderstandings, all conflict in the world. Do you think, that's the question, do you think English could fulfill that hope for humanity?
Your student is one of many great minds. H.G. Wells thought along these lines, and in one of his many utopian novels, he wrote about a world in which global English would be the lingua franca, the way your student envisages it today. Since we have only 1 minute, I'll give you the short answer. A single language for the entire world would be possible if there is a global community which feels a sense of global identity as one community, and this community would have one language. Now, I said I'm an optimist, but my optimism will not extend this far, I have to say. I would love this utopia. Now, the world I see is English is used as a native language, as a second language, a foreign language, or a lingua franca by 2 out of 8 billion people roughly living today. That is pretty good. Probably owing to development, growing interconnection, this may be 4 billion people in 2050. Half the population of the world then. But there's a saturation point because you will not integrate the world. It will be multipolar economically, disparity, political rivalries. And so the world will be will remain multilingual, less multilingual than it is today. Many small languages, indigenous languages, sadly will disappear. And one thing which is a definite threat to English monolingualism is actually progress in language technology. Because if you think about during the long AI winter, let's say 1960s to 2010, there was no progress in machine translation. They always put online new systems, but they never worked. Now we have machine translation, which works for around 100 languages in some way or another. This will become even better. And in a world in which your smartphone, I mean, if you're in Japan, you photograph Japanese, and for about 5 years, you've had meaningful translations into your own language. Now, this type of comfort will make it actually convenient to not give up your L1 and to use exactly that kind of English plus thing. If it feels better to use English, you speak your English and you know about its imperfections. If you're worried about it and if you translate, you have it translated and you look at it. So technology is really now the agent of spreading and entrenching English further, but indirectly, and in a second step, functioning machine translation and all those meta visions of the universal translator. You can look at the shiny videos they are putting out now, very far away from the reality, but in 10, 15 years' time, some of it may actually come true. And you and I could talk to each other in German and Romanian without going through English, and we would feel comfortable. Now, I don't think we would feel comfortable now if I held my phone and had my German translated into Romanian and you, but could be that we don't have to go to typing anymore. We just speak German and we produce a written Romanian version, or a synthesized spoken Romanian version could be easier, much easier and comfortable. So this goes against the, but I don't want to eat into anybody's coffee break.
Okay.
We'll probably meet in smaller groups in some of the contributions. But so I would like to thank my audience. Unfortunately, I was only able to see my own screen, and I really miss the opportunity to interact with many acquaintances and friends. And so
next time,
I was glad
we
to be
hope you'll be here.
Part of this opening of a great event.
Okay, so, thank you then.
So mulțumesc mult.
Noi mulțumim.